Most of you today go in and use ChatGPT or other generative AI and you ask for an answer. And the moment you begin asking for an answer and just accepting its answer, then you're taking away from your own thought, your own critical thinking. But there's a simple solution to this, which is you never ask it for one of anything. You ask for five or three. And for comparison and contrast, you as the human being have to look at all of them. You have to bring in your own sensibilities, aesthetics, critical thinking, and you have to decide now which one of them am I going to take and why? Or am I going to go and explore one of them further based on some of this analysis? So it becomes more of an exploration tool as opposed to something to replace your thinking.
Welcome to the Coursera podcast, where we have conversations with renowned experts and industry leaders to explore global trends impacting the future of education and work. I'm your host, Arunav Sinha, Vice President of Global Communications at Coursera. It is rare to live through major technological advances that will be talked about for decades to come, but that's what we are experiencing right now with generative AI. Prompt engineering, the practice of designing questions or instructions to elicit specific responses from AI models, is an increasingly crucial skill as large language models like ChatGPT rise in popularity. Today, I'm excited and honored to welcome Dr. Jules White on the podcast, a distinguished computer scientist and a leading authority on large language models and prompt engineering. Dr. White is a professor of computer science at Vanderbilt and the director of the university's initiative on the future of learning and generative AI. He created one of the first and largest online courses for prompt engineering. Together with his second free course on advanced data analysis of ChatGPT, his classes have reached more than 200,000 students worldwide on Coursera. Today, we will discuss how Dr. White got started with artificial intelligence, his best practices for incorporating AI into education, and his outlook on the future of Gen AI in the workplace. Welcome, Jules. I'm so delighted to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this is an exciting topic. So I really appreciate you inviting me to talk about it.
I have been waiting to have this conversation for such a long time. Before we dive into the meat of the topic, can you start by sharing a little bit about your journey into artificial intelligence and what drew you to AI?
Yeah, well, I've been working particularly in cybersecurity and software engineering and doing a lot of applied AI in those areas. And what I always tell people is November 1st, 2022, if you'd stopped me on the street and you'd said this thing called ChatGPT is going to come out in a month, here's what it's going to be able to do, I would have told you I don't believe it's going to exist in my lifetime. And then it came out and it was so shocking in terms of its capabilities, in terms of what it could do in terms of software engineering, cybersecurity, all of these impacts that it could have. And it fundamentally changed the way that I look at computing and I think how computing is going to be done in the future. So that's really what got me drawn in, is because we've been doing computing one way in the past, which was, we have these operations like if, else, plus, minus. And suddenly you have operations that look like act as some persona, act as a skeptic. And that's a fundamentally different way of doing computing that we just didn't have before. Rethinking how we do computing when we have totally different types of operations, and how do we teach computing differently? How do we solve different types of problems that weren't solvable before? That's really exciting to me. And that's kind of what got me drawn in. Is I looked at what I'd been doing for my entire career in software engineering, cybersecurity, applied AI, and overnight things could be done in a paragraph of text that we couldn't solve with all the supercomputing in the world the day before. And so that drew me in and I was hooked. I want to explore and understand, how do we harness this?
And as someone who has seen the evolution of large language models and prompt engineering up close, did the sudden rise of ChatGPT surprise you?
It really did. And I would say that we've been doing deep learning, all of these things, but they were very sort of targeted, I would say, and narrow in their scope and capability and what they could do. And so before we had AI and you would train a model that did one particular thing and it was very brittle. Or even if we were training like transformers or something, we were typically using it in a very narrow way. And then suddenly overnight, you could take the same model, ChatGPT and GPT-3.5, and you could solve just about any problem under the sun, some better, some worse. But you could write software and then you could turn around and write a recipe, and then you could turn around and analyze a presentation that you were about to give. And what that really changed for me is, before of thinking as AI as something narrow and sort of brittle that we had, it suddenly became general purpose computing. So I think of it a lot like the new CPU. So we have CPUs that were before that could do certain types of operations. Now we have a new CPU, which is generative AI, that has totally new operations, but it has that same general purpose nature to it. I think of that as the big change in AI. And I think this is also why you hear people talking about artificial general intelligence, is because it's that generality that is really different. I didn't expect us to get to that generality that fast. And I certainly didn't expect just scaling things up and scaling the quality of the data that was fed to do it as well. But I also sort of suspect, and I've sort of heard rumors that, everybody was a little bit surprised by the things that GPT-3.5 could do and ChatGPT could do. And it was part of like its exposure to the community and seeing all of the things people were doing with it that really made people realize, oh, wait a minute, this is something different.
Absolutely. And so, as an educator, because at the heart, you're an educator, you're a teacher, and your classroom expands beyond Vanderbilt in many ways. Your prompt engineering course on Coursera now has more than 250,000 learners worldwide. Is Gen AI truly on its way to becoming a fundamental skill, much like math or writing, that everyone should learn? Or is the current excitement about it just a passing trend?
Oh, I absolutely think it's going to be a fundamental skill that everybody's going to need to learn. And I think of it because it is going to change our interface to computing. Everybody is expected to be able to use a computer today. And I think this is going to be the interface to computing of the future. You're going to go in and you're going to use generative AI to control computing and to solve problems with computing. And so, just like we expect people today to be able to use computers and we teach basic fundamental computing skills, we are going to expect people to have generative AI skills and the ability to do prompt engineering and interact and solve problems through conversation with computing. I think the other thing that's indicative of this is one of the top questions that I get all the time is, how do I get a job as a prompt engineer? And I always tell people I've heard these jobs exist, but I've never seen them. But I've heard a lot of companies that have said we want every single employee to understand how to use some basic prompt engineering, how to use generative AI to solve problems. And I've actually only met one prompt engineer in my entire time that I've been doing this. But I've met enormous numbers of companies that said, we expect every one of our employees to do this, every role to do this. And so I think that itself is a data point that this is not a niche skill that we're going to have a big job market for prompt engineers and nobody else is going to know about it. No, this is computing for all. And when it becomes computing for all, which it is, then you expect everybody to have to learn it.
Yeah, and in fact, that's a fundamental mindset change that instead of it being a proper dedicated role, I think everybody will need to learn how to engage with the technology and get the best out of it, either to drive productivity or innovation on any kind of job or organizational design topics that they're grappling with.
Absolutely. I think the other thing too is that it has new capabilities that we did not have before it came out. And those capabilities are so broadly applicable. So that, the simple one that I've always thought is so powerful is act as a skeptic and critique my work, give me feedback. That is useful in just about any domain to apply it to your work and think, could I do this better? Is there something that I'm missing? That fundamental question is valuable to probably almost every role. Am I making the right decision? Have I thought through this carefully enough? And you can apply that all over the place. But that's one example of a huge number that are out there. And so that's why it's going to be so important.
In fact, that brings me to a dilemma that people will often have on campus is that aspect of critical thinking and being a skeptic. Is that an advice that you give to students as well? And how can universities help students use Chat GPT or Gen AI more broadly, effectively, and safely?
Well, I think the starting point is I heard somebody one time said that we are going to give space to students to just go figure it out themselves. And a lot of that has already happened. It's like give everybody space, they'll figure it out. But I think what we know is that just like many, many other things, there's a big difference if you teach somebody how to use it intentionally and thoughtfully and strategically. You will get a vast difference in outcome. So, a simple example I always give students, I say, most of you today go in and use ChatGPT or other generative AI and you ask for an answer. And the moment you begin asking for an answer and just accepting its answer, then you're taking away from your own thought, your own critical thinking. And in some ways, you're sort of de-skilling yourself. And this is what there was a lot of concern about. But there's a simple solution to this, which is you never ask it for one of anything. You ask for five or three. and for comparison and contrast, pros and cons, whatever it is, so that you as the human being have to look at all of them. You have to bring in your own sensibilities, aesthetics, critical thinking, and you have to decide now which one of them am I going to take and why, or am I going to go and explore one of them further based on some of this analysis. So it becomes more of an exploration tool as opposed to something to replace your thinking. And so I have to tell students, your goal is to use it to think more, not less. Your goal is to use it to explore more than you could have. And the moment you start using it in ways that don't do that, you're really putting yourself at risk. You want to be using it in ways that cause you to be more creative, to be more thoughtful, to talk to more people, to be more critical of these ideas so that you fact check them, these things, not less. The classic example of using it to think less is I get an email from a student that says, I would like you to write this recommendation for me. And it's always like there's some placeholder in there. So it's like, dear professor placeholder, I would like you to write this recommendation for me. And you could tell they didn't actually read it, look through it, or think through it. That is the opposite of what we want. That is when we haven't given people training and thoughtful approaches to use it.
So, in a post GPT world, in a post Gen AI world, what will professors like you will increasingly look for in students, and what skills you would expect them to develop?
Number one, creativity, critical thinking, this sense of exploration and experimentation. Those three things are really, really important. I think the other thing that we need to be teaching students is a lot of students don't understand how to use generative AI to help them learn and study. You can go in and create a quiz on any topic nearly instantaneously. You can upload the faculty member's slides and say, quiz me on this. Think of thoughtful discussion questions that I can think about or that I can ask in class. I don't understand this concept, but I do understand, I'm really into mountain biking or I'm really into lacrosse. Explain this to me, using, concepts from lacrosse or mountain biking or whatever it is you're interested in. And, you can personalize education for yourself. There's also this privacy thing, right? People are worried about asking questions in class. They feel nervous about talking to a faculty member or a teacher. There's this self-confidence issue, and it can fix a lot of that by allowing you to go and explore privately. It doesn't work for all topics. It's probably not sophisticated enough to do some things. But if you look at the vast majority of education, it's at a level that it can do a really good job and can help coach people through things, help them, learn basic concepts. And when you're talking about things like the enrollment issues in higher education across a lot of schools, you start by trying to help support people. So there's lots of attrition across lots of schools, and you can do all kinds of things by teaching students how to use these techniques to overcome issues with understanding, with how do they get confidence, all these types of things. So I think we really need to be building those skills to help students learn better. And then we also need to be then emphasizing the importance of critical thinking, creativity, and really fact checking and thinking about ideas.
Yeah, the entire promise of a very personalized educational experience seems possible with the support of AI now. That obviously it's just not possible to scale that at a level that we want, but now increasingly that seems to be possible if good guardrails are put in place by campuses. Another question that I often get asked, and in fact, my son asked this and was very passionate about coding. It's top of mind for a lot of high schoolers now. How will Gen AI affect coding and the future of language learning? I mean, something that you do all the time in schools as well.
If you look at the future of computer science, software engineering, I think it's very bright. There's this thing called Jevons paradox. And basically, they identified that when steam engines became more and more efficient and using less and less coal, it actually led to increased consumption of coal because you saw more and more people using steam power for things. And I think that's what we're going to see in computer science, software engineering, is that it's going to radically increase the demand because people are going to be using computing to solve new types of problems that they weren't using it for. And they're also going to be creating all these little individualized computing solutions that have to be integrated, architected, and it has to be done thoughtfully. And that's where computer scientists, software engineers are going to shine, is because they're going to understand those larger scale architectural computing algorithmic issues. Now, we've been telling students, as long as I've been teaching, I've been telling students, look, here are the languages and things that I learned when I started. Here are the ones I'm using today. They are not the same at all. Everybody wants to focus on languages and frameworks and get really obsessed with a particular thing. And I just say, I promise you that will all change. That's the one thing I can guarantee you, is that will change over and over throughout your career. And you're going to continuously relearn them. And this is just another evolution of that. You're using a different type of tooling and technology to do computing, but you're still solving computing problems and architectural and algorithmic problems. But whether or not you're tied to a particular language or framework, just like it before, it wasn't that important. Now it's going to be even less important. But the scale and complexity of computing problems is still going to be there, if not much, much higher.
Fascinating. You lead Vanderbilt's Future of Learning and Generative AI initiative, where you and an expert team set those university wide best practices that other universities can learn from. From an instructor's perspective, can you talk about your approach to integrating Gen AI into higher education and how can we use this technology to make learning even more effective?
Well, I think the starting point is as an institution, you have to encourage exploration and learning on the topic. So I think the first thing that we saw that I think was just sort of very large scale mistake was that it came out and institutions had this gut reaction of saying this is cheating, you're not to use it on campus. And what we did is we denied students the opportunity to go and explore and learn about it, but we also denied faculty and we created a culture where a lot of faculty felt like they shouldn't go learn about it or that it was something that they wanted to discourage rather than learning more about it. So you got to start by creating a environment where learning and exploration of generative AI is encouraged, but thoughtfully. So you have the right policy in place. So at Vanderbilt, we say, we encourage you to go and explore and learn about it. Faculty are the arbiters of what is appropriate for their classroom and for a particular assignment. So listen carefully to faculty. If you have questions about if it's appropriate to use or not, ask the faculty member. And faculty, please very carefully and thoughtfully communicate that at the beginning of class so the expectations are well known. So let's communicate, but let's not make it that it is something that you shouldn't be doing. It's something that is an individual faculty member's choice. The second thing that I think is important for faculty is to educate themselves on it. So a lot of faculty, I think, initially knowing very little about it, had gut reactions that were highly negative. And I encourage faculty, I say, okay, I don't know what is best for your classroom, but I know education is a good thing and I know learning about it is valuable. And if you learn about it and you understand it well, and then you say it's not appropriate for my classroom, fair game. But at the same time, you don't know what's appropriate for my classroom or somebody else's. So keep your inferences confined to your area and let each faculty member go and learn and educate themselves and then make the appropriate decision for their discipline, because I don't think we can say across disciplines what is best. I think the other thing, though, across whatever discipline we are working in, we want to teach students these sort of fundamentals, and you can think of it as prompt engineering, but also problem solving of how to use it in ways that help them to further understand something, to think more deeply about problems, to explore more avenues, more solutions. Because we talk a lot about AI bias, but humans are the source of the bias in AI because it learned from us. And it's interesting because generative AI is a tool that we can really effectively use to help humans overcome their bias. So we have bias in data. This data means this. So you can ask generative AI, give me 5 interpretations of this data. And then humans are forced to think through them and like, which one and how do I test these different theories? Problem solving. You go in today and you say, I know how to solve the problem this way. But instead we say, no, give me 5 ways to solving the problem. And then the human has to think about it. Which way am I going to solve the problem and why? And a simple example of this is we've talked about in our makerspace, having it to when a student walks into the makerspace, they can go up and they can interact with generative AI, and the generative AI knows every machine, every nut, bolt, material in the lab, and they can say, here's what I want to make, give me options. And it gives them lots of different options. And then they can go and start thinking about what would be the benefits of manufacturing a particular way. And so I think we need to teach students that sort of way of using it to explore, because what they developed initially was a way to disempower themselves, to take away their own thinking, to cut and paste the answer into something else without thinking thoughtfully through it. And so we need to reshape how they use it and teach these other techniques.
Fantastic. In fact, prompt engineering allows us to tap into Gen AI's unique capabilities to create AI assistants, auto generate content. We know that we are using some of that on Coursera as well, and analyze data. The possibilities are simply endless. Without giving away too much from your course, what are some beginner friendly everyday prompts to master as we incorporate Gen AI into our daily lives?
Yeah, that's a great one. Well, I think one of my favorite, just because it shows how different Gen AI is from normal computing, is what I call the persona pattern. So asking Gen AI, I say, act as, a nutritionist, act as the IRS, act as a chief technology officer, act as a student taking a software engineering course who didn't come to the last lecture and is feeling lost. what is going to be confusing in these slides? And all kinds of things like that. I mean, there's just all kinds of creative ways of using that prompt to do really powerful things. And so I think that's one of the most basic ones. I always tell people that one first. I also tell people that one first because I don't think we could have, even if we had connected all the supercomputers on the planet before this came out, I don't think we would have had something that could do that effectively. And everybody can tap into it at any time. Another one I think that's really great is you have a team that's meeting, you record a meeting, and you ask things like, what is ambiguous about our plan? I mean, as humans, we classically overestimate how well other human beings understand what we're about to do. And simple things like that can create questions that allow a group to discuss things. And I think that's a great example of something really simple, using it in ways that help people to ask questions and talk to each other. Because I always also hear a lot of people say, oh, well, isn't this going to make us all just sit around and type with generative AI? And my answer is, I hope not. and here's some simple examples that you can do to do that. So I think those are two simple examples of good ones. The other one I think that a lot of people don't know about that is one of the most fascinating capabilities is that you can teach the model something brand new in a prompt through something that's called in-context learning. And it sounds really complicated, but it's basically you show it examples of a problem and then the solution, or you show it examples basically of what you want it to do and the correct way of doing that thing. And it can learn from those examples. So you can show it, here's what I want you to extract from user reviews of a product. Here's what the information I want to get out of the user review. And you show it, here's a user review, here's that information extracted. Here's a user review, here's that information extracted. And it can learn to do that operation just like you would teach an intern. You would say, here are our user reviews, here's the information that we want you to manually extract. Here's a sample of us having done that so that you can follow along. Well, generative AI can do the same thing, it turns out, but most people don't know how to use that and do that.
You're touching a little bit on the enterprise use case. You have said that GenAI isn't just a higher ed initiative. In fact, that it's a company and culture initiative that can supercharge talent and productivity in the workplace. But when you look at a recent BCG report that came out some time back, 89% of the CEOs rank AI as their top three tech priorities of 2024. But 59% of those leaders also say they have limited or no confidence in their executive team's proficiency in the technology. Based on your own research, how should business leaders responsible for training and incorporating AI into their organization should deal with it in order to optimize both talent and tech agility?
Well, I think Coursera is a great example of what they should be doing. So, Jeff, your CEO, is somebody who gets generative AI, who is using it every day. And I think that's the starting point. Leaders need to go and educate themselves concretely. I think prompt engineering is a great starting point of how to go and interact with these models to solve problems for themselves so that they can understand it. And then use that knowledge to help influence what they promote and their strategy. Because I think it's kind of like saying, yeah, I've heard about math and I think it's going to be very valuable for us. And then somebody asks you to add 2 plus 2 and you're like, I don't know the answer. I haven't actually added anything. I just know that math is important. And I think a lot of leaders are kind of at that high level. And it makes sense in the past because a lot of these topics were things that in order to know how to apply it, it would take years and years of experience. And so you as a leader could not come up to speed. That is not the case with generative AI. You can absolutely go and educate yourself very quickly, come up to speed on it, and then go and be proficient and knowledgeable and understand how to apply it. Our chancellor's up to speed on generative AI. There are lots of CEOs and executives that I talk to all the time who are up to speed on it, who get it, who are applying it every day. And you have to have sort of that knowledge of how to apply it yourself in order to be able to strategically think through how to apply it across your organization. So I think the starting point is go and learn about it yourself. You have to have some hands-on experimentation and exploration. And more than likely, if you do that initial bit, you're going to be hooked. And you're going to realize that as a leader, this is profoundly beneficial to me on a daily basis in my role in decision making and all kinds of things that I do. And so that will then not only help you as a leader make better decisions, but help you make better decisions about how to then spread it across your organization.
Wow, valuable advice. To close out the conversation, can you share how you personally use GenAI in your daily life outside of classroom?
The number one way I use it all the time as a software engineer and I'm writing code. So we are producing the generative AI platform for the university. And so on a daily basis, I'm writing code in it. And it is unbelievable how much more productive I am. But it's also exciting because before I was really focused on code, and now I'm really focused on thinking of what is the problem that I want to solve? How do I describe what the ideal solution looks like? And then the code is something that comes that's produced by the generative AI. It's almost not even, used to be code was the big IP. Now it's all about how do we solve this problem? And code is like a temporary thing that we use to solve that problem until we regenerate it to solve it in a new way that's even better. And so I can focus on thinking about solving problems and what I want the solution to look like. And I can also go and explore. I use it all the time to say, okay, let's compare and contrast options for solving this problem or try to explore what something means. I think another great way is educating yourself, is you can go and say, like, explain this concept to me. Okay, now you can follow up. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? If I go into a new domain or I'm meeting with somebody new and I know that there's terms or things that they're going to talk about that I don't know, I'll go and do some basic education. And one of the things that's just exciting is like you can go and sort of explore any topic. The other one I love, and then I use it for all the time, is I take rough notes and ideas and then I turn it into a draft of some product that I want to produce. We record a lot of our meetings in our team, and we'll take the meeting notes and then we'll say, now turn the meeting into a document that has all these things. Like we just walked through and recorded ourselves doing X, Y, and Z in our software. And now let's turn that into a developer guide or into a user guide just by listening to what we did. We focus on the interaction in the real world, discussing what we're doing. And then for free, we get things like user guides, developer guides, roadmaps, features. That's a really exciting thing, to be able to take one thing and turn it into all kinds of other things. But it's still our thing. We're still solving the problem. We're talking through it. It's our thought. We're just using it to reshape our thought into all these other products that we need to go along with it.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with the audience.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoy talking about these topics.
That was an enlightening discussion at so many levels. I deeply appreciate Dr. White for sharing his knowledge and insights with us today. His course, Prompt Engineering for ChatGPT, is free now on Coursera.org. By the end of the course, you will be able to use large language models for a wide range of tasks in your personal, professional, and academic endeavors. If you enjoyed this episode of the Coursera podcast, please rate, review, and share. Until next time, I'm Arunav Sinha. Thank you for tuning in.